Okay, so we are live. It's not as bright in this room today. I'm not quite sure why. I have a little bit of a migraine, so if I seem a little off, I apologize. I have taken Excedrin, but it is not yet fully kicked in. So I've been thinking a little bit about what I would start with today. The questions have been a little slow to come. I've had a few questions that have actually popped up after the stream has ended. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this week. This was a hard week for me. And this week we had a couple of pretty major things happen. There have been a lot of protests, and rightly so, about the death of a Black man in police custody. And we also surpassed 100,000 deaths in America, although it's probably substantially more. The United States death count is most likely undercounting because we are not counting excess deaths. There's a lot of home deaths. There's a lot of people who haven't been tested from COVID-19. And I, rather than getting too in depth on maybe each of these issues, because I've covered a lot of them on social media, I was thinking a lot last night because it was very hot. I was up with the humidity. Just started thinking about what causes this, what gets us to where we are. And I think we have a lot of underlying problems. We've got a lot of systemic racism, a lot of systemic inequity, and problems have just really festered, distrust in our government. And I stepped back and I was thinking about what makes it better and how did we get here? And I see that there are some people joining. If you have questions, this is not just me chatting away. I'm happy to do so. That's sort of a monologue. You can put a question in the live chat, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Do be aware there is somewhere between a 30-second and 2-minute delay in you typing to me getting questions. I'm trying to resolve that. I'm not sure what causes it. So going back and thinking about, and Drama Cat is making an appearance in the background. She's very enthusiastic today. So if you see jumping, that is the cat. So, going back and thinking about what causes this and how we got where we are, I'm thinking a lot about marketing, and I see this all the time, insert area first. And we've got America First, which is something that is very well used with our current executive branch, but I see a lot of Maine First. And, when I first tried to run for office, I thought, gosh, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to say I'm putting Maine First. And I don't use that language anymore. Why I don't use that language is not only does it have some pretty severely white nationalist undertones that make me uncomfortable, but also it's not the job. And I think that we got to where we are a lot in part because we aren't putting the job first. We're telling people what they want to hear, not what the job needs to be, not what's true. And I think that's put us in a space that isn't fantastic. So if I were to say Maine First, let's put Maine First. That sounds great. Mainers want to be first. That's who they want to vote for. But that's not the job. And that's not being very honest with voters. So when you go down to Washington, D.C. and you're in Congress or you're president, you wouldn't want a president who put their state first either. That's not a great place to be. So when you're down there and you're saying, I'm going to put X first, what you're saying is my highest priority is getting jobs and getting stuff back for my state. Not my highest priority is we really need a functional federal government. We really need the scaffolding that this country is built upon to work well. And that's how we got here. We've got a lot of horse trading. We've got a lot of adding fat to bills. And we're not going through and looking at our government and saying, why do we still have systemic racism? Instead, we're saying, oh, well, I really got to add some money for Bath Ironworks because we got to get some jobs in. We're not going through those bills and saying, hey, we still have statistically anomalous rates of minorities being arrested. Like, what can we do to make sure that we have a more egalitarian country? What can we do to make sure that we're not disproportionately impacting some groups as a federal government? Some states maybe are better than others, but it seems to be a problem in every state, and particularly in states where it's not awesome. Are we using the carrot? Are we giving some extra tax dollars to help develop programs that help against racial profiling and help against bias? Is it a stick? Are we going to penalize people either by making things legal or forcing investigations? We already have some prohibitions, although we've been rolling some of those back, which is terrifying. But we need to be looking at how our underlying federal government is working or not working. Right now, it's tragic that we have an executive branch leader that isn't really addressing things well, that is providing not just not enough information or inconsistent information, but actually misinformation, which is awful. But it's more than that. We have a lot of problems within our country that we don't have legislative bodies addressing. If you look at your state legislature, their job mirrors what the federal government does. And your state legislature, they shouldn't be there trying to get perks for their hometown. That's not the way a state legislature is supposed to work. They're supposed to make sure your state works. They're supposed to make sure that if there's problems in the statewide statutes that are creating systemic injustice in how people are arrested. Yesterday, I talked online about, I brought back a thread about $11.19 from What I Was Lawyer of the Day. And we have a lot of these little injustices in Maine that happen all the time. And, that's what the state legislature is supposed to take care of. The state legislature is supposed to go through and either address new needs, work on budgets, or take the laws that are already there and just periodically relook at them and say, hey, should we really be penalizing people with felonies for thefts of under $20, even if they're a habitual offender? If jail hasn't served them well, they're probably not going to learn to not steal if it's been, the difference between 30 days in jail and 60 days or 6 months in jail is probably not going to have them doing that. We have to look at why they're stealing. Are they hungry? Are they unable to access resources? Is it an underlying mental health issue? Were there a lot of false claims? Do we have a racial disparity issue? So, those are things that I've talked about pretty consistently in the past. And one of the things that I said on there was that, 30 days in jail, and a lot of those trivial sentences tend to end up in jail. Minorities tend to end up in jail more. Those are devastating. 30 days in jail, I think we don't think about, you lose a month, right? But 30 days in jail, you are often losing your job. You may lose your transportation if your car is repossessed or you don't have a way to pay for it. Many people lose their housing, their health insurance, access to their children. It is devastating to spend more than a day or two in jail. I mean, a day in jail is devastating for a lot of people, but any substantial period of time where you're precluded from earning income, where you're precluded from accessing appropriate healthcare, where you're precluded from having regular contact with your children, whether officially the state stepping in or officially you being in a position where your kids just are pissed off that mom or dad is arrested. Those are devastating. And, within a few minutes, I had somebody reply to me, that happened to me. And I think that we really underestimate how often we are doing massive harms, and I've been in court with DAs, and I don't think the DAs necessarily mean to destroy lives. And I think they see it as the person who committed the crime or who has been accused of committing a crime is destroying their own life. But there is a lot of callousness with which we hand out these sentences that seem, it's just a month in jail. But it isn't just a month in jail. These are really devastating sentences to people. And it perpetuates that callousness, perpetuates to how people are arrested. And again, it disproportionately impacts people who are minorities. And it is astonishing to how much it does. And the low-level crimes are the ones that are really horrible. So I haven't read every single piece regarding the gentleman that was murdered by a police officer, but it looks like he was just accused of, passing a bad bill, and he may not have even known it was a bad bill. Um, that most certainly shouldn't be a death sentence, but even if it's not a death sentence, it also shouldn't be necessarily 30 days in jail, particularly if he was unaware that he was doing it. And even if he was aware that he was doing it, we have to look at why. A lot of our criminal code is set up to be punitive, not to make our society functional. And that applies on a federal level as well. And we need to be really looking at how we're handling these systemic injustices, whether we're handling these systemic injustices on a state level and supporting states and relooking at their laws, or whether we're going through our federal laws. And we've got a lot of criminalization at the federal level. It's pretty awful too, and disproportionately impacts minorities. I actually have a question, so I'm going to read this real quick. There we go. Yeah, this is somebody who's saying that they had to spend 30 days in jail. If I had to spend 30 days in jail, I'd lose my apartment. There's no way I'd be able to find a new apartment, and homelessness would kill me. And I think that's true. And I think we see, when I'm lawyer of the day, I see people who are caught up in the law in ways that, aren't necessarily criminal, but we've criminalized them. A lot of the times I see people who, maybe they just didn't have the money to re-register their car, but they had to get to work. And, of course, the law's answer is prioritize that. But if you're feeding hungry children and your hours have been cut, or you just don't have access to it, the fines and fees on top of that don't make it so that you're more able. Maybe we should look at better sliding fee programs. Maybe we should look at monthly payments for people to be able to pay their vehicle registrations or to become in compliance. A lot of people just get trapped from being poor and administrative and procedural problems. A lot of people, lose their home and get a letter sent to them for an administrative action that they don't get because they're homeless. And then all of that rolls up. It's really hard once you've gotten stuck in the system. And minorities tend to get stuck in the system substantially more than others. Even in Maine, where we are almost entirely white in Maine, we are, I think 97% white. We still have disproportionate outcomes here too. So even though it impacts, those disproportionate impacts are on a small percentage of our population, it's about 3%. Those 3% of people matter. They don't stop being people because they are a minority. And I think that managing by the majority doesn't always get us where we need to be. And managing for our state doesn't get us where we need to be when we're talking about federal level jobs. So I guess my takeaway from this week, I was overwhelmingly sad and heartbroken at how our government is working and what we're seeing play out with our citizens. But more than that, I guess I am looking for ways to not necessarily be uplifted, but to look for solutions. And the solution is, really pay attention to who we're putting in office, really pay attention to the people that we're looking at. Don't just look at the catchy slogans because they don't mean anything. And if they do mean something, it's actually not great, right? Saying things like, I put Maine first or Mainers first. That is a horrible election slogan. It says, I am willing to go to the federal government and sacrifice 49 other states. I am willing to go to the federal government and say, hey, I don't care if you got bad stuff going on in Alabama. I don't care if there's a natural disaster in Texas and if you get hit by a hurricane. I don't care if you are in Flint and you don't have access to clean water. It's saying, I feel like I've gotten, and this is a little sidebar, I apologize. I feel like I've gotten slightly too tall trying to move this up so I can see you all. But when you go and you say, I'm here to make my state first, what you're saying is I'm not putting America first. I'm not putting the United States first. And it is a United States first job. We don't hire people for hurricane and weather centers that only put their block first. They have to provide weather information for everybody. And we need to be looking at our federal government like that. So, I challenge you, for any of the candidates, not just me, for any of the candidates anywhere, when you're asking questions and you're getting platitudes and you're getting cheesy little things like I put Maine first or I put whatever state here first, ask what that means. A lot of the stuff I've been watching a lot of other political feeds, and not just for the race I'm in, but there's some sharp contrast. There are some candidates out there that try on a daily basis to generate real content and let you know who they are on a fundamental level. I try to do that. You get a little bit more of my sense of humor than maybe you love, but gosh, I don't think I'm going to survive 2020 without a sense of humor. So, you're going to get from me very specific feedback on events, very specific feedback on types of laws, very specific feedback on problems. And some of those answers will be, so enormous that they have to be a little general. Like when people talk about climate change is a huge problem. And it has tens of thousands of causes, tens of thousands of ways we can interact. And so when I say something like you need to comb through bills and look at every single bill and make sure you're being responsible to our planet and our environment and our habitat, that really isn't a trivial statement. It's that, in one bill over here, we might be looking at, hey, can we generate green energy with solar panels and making it so parking garages are helping our energy grid. And over here, it might be, hey, what research and development can we do with including seaweed in the diet of cows to work on how much methane they emit. There's just so many micro points in that there are a lot. But a lot of the pieces that we have, you can be fairly specific without necessarily addressing every single micro point. You can talk about racial disparities and say, look, we have a lot of problems in the criminal code. We need to make sure we're not over penalizing for minor infractions. We have to make sure that we know what our goals are. Is our goal in the federal government with our criminals stuff? Is it to punish? Is it to rehabilitate? Is it restorative? We need to really, be really looking at those things. Those are semi-specific answers still, and those aren't trivial and platitudes. And so really push back on people who are running for office. And if all they give you is fluffy, polished answers that don't say anything at all, don't hire that person. They're bad. they're trying to sell you something that isn't real. They're trying to sell you something that is slightly too good. I've talked about this before on social media. My internet connection is just a little choppy. So I've talked about before on social media that I understand why people get conned. And I've openly said I think the president of our country is running a con, actually multiple simultaneous cons on our country. And the reason why a con feels good is you're getting just a little bit better than what life feels like it's normally giving you. It feels good. It feels good to be conned. It feels good to be on the receiving end of a con until it doesn't. But a lot of our politicians are witting or unwittingly running cons too. They're telling you what you want to hear that's a little bit better than what can be delivered and isn't actionable. So that's a problem. So actually, I think I might have another question. Is our current U.S. Senator you feel is putting America first and legislating the way? So putting the federal government first, I try to stay away from that America first language. Just the way it's been used lately makes me very uncomfortable. Without agreeing with them necessarily on policy, I have been in the last couple of weeks compared to a mashup of two people, like the same two people, multiple times. And they're people that I don't necessarily know if everything they do is putting the federal government first, but I think they're trying to. So the two people I've been compared to in a mashup together, like at least maybe 8 to 10 times in the last couple of weeks, is very strange that all these people who don't know each other are coming up with the same comparisons, are Justin Amash and Katie Porter. I think Katie Porter is doing a really good job of doing a lot of the stuff that, I did in 2018 and that I still do now. I mean, she pulls out a whiteboard, which I don't do that often because I'm very uncomfortable on video. I'm doing this for you, not me. I don't like being videotaped. I am sometimes overly animated and it doesn't always film well. There's people who can like beautifully cry or like beautifully give you the rolled eye. I don't have that skill set. Breaking things down like I've done with bills, I think I do have a lot in common with Katie Porter, and I think that she really sincerely is trying to advocate for the average person, and I really appreciate about her. Justin Amash, I don't agree with him on a lot of his points of view and a lot of his principles. I think that his and I apologize, my eyes are watering because it's very dry down here from the air conditioning. So I'm sorry if I look like I'm rubbing my eyes. Um, I think that he thinks he is putting guiding principles first. I think that, even though it pains him to do so, he's apologized for misconstruing things in the past. And even though it's not necessarily politically advantageous, he says, look, if I'm going to have these principles of smaller government or less debt, I need to acknowledge when we're not doing that. I really liked that he was willing to say we need to be, doing push-up economy. And I don't think that was the term he used, but I agree with him and Andrew Yang, that at least on a temporary basis right now, do I agree with it long term? I don't know, but on a short term basis, we should have created a UBI like system for our citizens with this pandemic. It is irresponsible to be continuing to have millions of people who don't know how they're going to feed their kids, who don't know how they're going to feed themselves, who don't know how they're going to keep the power on, who don't have any stability at all. We're several months into this, and the mechanisms that the senators used by going through unemployment insurance, it gives the governors a lot of power. And I was very nervous about this mechanism when they put it in, and everybody's like, oh, they're getting this great bump to unemployment. The problem with unemployment is you can change the rules and say, okay, well, you all have to go back to work now because we're deciding that if you refuse work, even if you don't feel safe, you're out of luck. And then suddenly that money stream is cut off. And I think there is a perception among a lot in Washington, D.C., and a lot of people generally in the country that Americans are fundamentally lazy and won't work. And I don't know that I find that to be true. I mean, I think not just even among the poor, especially among the poor that I work with, they want to work. Even if they had social services, I think that they would be more inclined to work because they want to go to work and they want to be clean. They want to go to work and we want to be healthy. I don't know about you, but if given all the time off in the world, sure, I might nap for a week or two. But then I'd probably within 2 weeks, I'd be working on my house. I've been out working on my fence. I think that we have a really hard time not working in America. We aren't as lazy of a society in that way as I think the perceptions are. So I think that coming back around to who I think is doing a good job, I think that we have several other people that are probably doing a good job for their districts. Ted Lieu is a Democrat. He is more liberal than I am by quite a bit, but I think he's very passionate, and I think he suits the area that he's from. I think Angus King, again, I don't agree with him on everything. He is a little bit more corporate than I am, and to some extent a little bit more Democrat leaning than I am. But I think that he's really trying to hold people accountable. I think he's really trying to make it about the federal government. It seems like in the horse trading, he does want, Maine to get its fair share, but I don't have the perception from him that fair share is to the disadvantage of other states. And he seems to have concerns that apply to other states. And I think particularly if you're a senator, if you're one of those 100, you really need to be aware of not only your only state's problems. I think it's a little bit more permissible in the House of Representatives to be representing your state's perspective more exclusively. But if you're a senator, you are not there for your state. So you are there for all the states. Your job is to bring your perspective from your state and to point out problems that you know a little bit better because they come from your state, and solutions maybe that you know better because they come from your state. But I think that the Senate is sort of a quirky place right now where it's gotten very partisan. And it to me, it looks like a lot of them are struggling with collegiality as well, which is important. I had somebody ask me the other day when I was collecting signatures, what I thought would fix the broken Senate. And I really truly believe that if we have 5 to 10 independents there, I think that'll make a huge stride, because we need some sort of objectivity, and we're all going to have our own personal biases and preferences and beliefs, but we need somebody who's not being pulled by a party to say, this is ridiculous. And we probably need a couple more conservative leaning. And I don't know that I would say the Republican Party on a federal level is necessarily conservative leaning. They've made some compromises that I think really step away from being conservative. For example, I grew up in a Republican household. I think of protecting the environment as a conservative value because you're looking at both short-term and long-term viability. I think of protecting medical choice as a conservative value, because what you're saying is, hey, I want a limited government that really just isn't in my personal space. That's an overreach. That's not the government's job. I think that being fiscally prudent is a value that I was raised on. I was told it's important to be fiscally responsible and fiscally prudent. That's just what we do. And I think that isn't really present. So I think that if we manage to get a few more senators that are sort of across the divide, a range of views, I think we probably need one or two that are more conservative than me. I think that we need several who are moderate. I think we need a few, something that I think that I do probably better than a lot of people who are there right now is I have a really strong bend for human rights. It really bothers me when I see systemic issues with human rights issues. When we're having stuff pop up, it's not just about all of the statistical things. I think that those are important. I think it's important to look at systemic racism. I think it's important to look at systemic abuse. I think it's important to look at systemic vulnerabilities. That when you're fixing the system, you can't do it without it. But I think you also need to look at the individuals. And I censor my stories a little bit because I think people deserve privacy. But even just looking at our systems of how they impact people on an individual basis, and knowing that it applies to everybody. So, for example, somebody emailed me a bit back, and they are younger, but in an assisted living facility because they just don't have the capacity to live on their own. And they don't even have the dignity of choosing the fragrances of products. They just have a product, and we shouldn't be looking at people for not dead as our minimum threshold. And that applies to people who have vulnerable disabilities, right? Like if you were in a home, you should be able to at least have the dignity of choosing how you smell and liking how you smell on a daily basis. That should be a human right to be able to say, the fragrance that my body is 24/7, 365 is not offensive to me. I'm not living in that sort of tortured state. And that would be such a minor and not particularly financially burdensome thing to be able to say, you have to have at least 2 or 3 fragrances of products or 2 or 3 brands of products that they can select between. We can extend people those dignities without it being a huge burden on anybody else. I am perfectly fine with saying we have that option. When you're looking at things like racism, it's important to look at criminalization. It's also important to look at the supports and, why we are in a space where it's not just that minorities are disproportionately or are disproportionately criminalized. Why are they disproportionately poor? Why is their net worth lower? We need to be looking at each of those and making sure that we're looking at those individual stories and problems too. So I think that we need more people who have that bend, not just for why are we killing people, but like how can we make people's lives better? I don't know that we have a whole lot of that in the Senate. I think they've got a lot that they're juggling. So I guess that would be the change that I would hope to bring there. And I would hope to bring more people generally, whether they're Democrat or Republican or independent. I really want more people who understand what we are inflicting on people with law. I think people look at the law as a sort of academic exercise, but it's a real thing that impacts people. So my husband has come back from his run, and I can see him wiggling at the door, but not wanting to interrupt me. I guess that's time for me to exit stage left. I'll leave this up for a little bit. If you guys have any feedback, please let me know, and I'm going to go finish the rest of my tea.